The night they didn't choose her, the moon hung low and blood-red, as if the sky itself had come to witness Sereth Kelwyn's undoing. The claiming wasn't a ceremony of hope, it was judgment wrapped in silk and shadow, where futures were decided by a single touch, a single word. Every name spoken aloud was a binding, every silence an execution. When hers echoed through the hall and no hand reached forward, no voice answered, it wasn't mere rejection, it was deletion. She didn't tremble, didn't lower her eyes or reach for anyone in desperation. She stood in the center of the marble floor, spine straight while the others were pulled into embraces and destiny. She wasn't alone in watching. Some turned away too quickly, shame flickering across their faces like candle flame. Others stared too long, mouths slightly open, eyes gleaming, feeding on her isolation like it was sustenance. She catalogued every face, every coward, every predator. Power, she realized, didn't always announce itself in dominance. Sometimes it revealed itself in how people treated your fall. She had no room for weakness. The sovereign didn't move. From his seat at the high dais, Cavor Nithris sat like something carved from winter itself, still, silent, absolute. He didn't flinch, didn't turn away. His silence wasn't cold indifference. It was deliberate weight, pressing down on the room like atmosphere before a storm. Sereth felt it settle on her skin. Not cruel, not kind, just aware, like standing too close to a blade that hadn't yet decided whether to cut. That was when she understood. Power that waits is never careless. They named her unclaimed, but that wasn't the truth. It was theater, strategy, someone else's game. And she refused to be the piece. She left before the final name was spoken. No drama, no tears, just a slow, steady turn through a crowd that didn't part, until suddenly it did. The doorway swallowed her whole, but not before she felt it, his gaze following, silent, unshaken, inescapable. It wouldn't be the last time. The hall smelled of incense and old promises, candle wax, crushed rose petals, the metallic tang of blood oaths sealed in silver bowls. Names rang out like incantations, each one a thread pulled taut between souls. One by one they stepped into the light, were touched, were spoken for, were bound. When silence answered her name, it wasn't confusion. It was sentence. No one moved forward. No one whispered her worth. The stillness cut through the room like frost across glass. Sereth didn't flinch, didn't drop her gaze or extend her hand in silent plea. Her arms remained at her sides, open and unfilled. Not because the rejection didn't carve into her, but because she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of watching her bleed. She saw who averted their eyes too fast, who shifted weight from foot to foot, unable to hold her stare. Shame has a sound, even when mouths stay closed. But sharper still were the ones who watched too long, drinking in her solitude, savouring the spectacle like fine wine. Hunger and cruelty shared the same face that night. She memorized them all. Every traitor, every spectator. Across the hall, Sovereign Cavor Nithris remained motionless. He offered no gesture, spoke no decree, but his silence commanded more than any proclamation. He observed without blinking, without sympathy, like someone who weighed all things carefully, especially what he chose not to touch. The hurt was clean, surgical, honest in a way false comfort never is. Her value hadn't been stolen. It had simply gone unrecognized. The distinction mattered, so she left before the final vows were sworn, moved through the assembly like a shadow still clothed in flesh, and behind her the order reset itself, not because she was worthless, but because her absence served them. That's the truth of rejection. It doesn't reveal your failure. It reveals who they become when you're not there to anchor them. The next morning the sky hung pale and bruised, like it had witnessed something it couldn't unsee. Sereth stood at the edge of the courtyard, not expelled but exiled to the margins. The outer circle, lesser duties. Gazes slipped over her like she was already becoming transparent, but she sensed him before her eyes found him. Cavor Nitharis, sovereign without ceremony, moving through the stone corridors without escort, without fanfare. No crown visible, no need. He didn't glance her way, not openly, but his presence cut through the space like a knife through still water, demanding attention without asking for it. He passed her, unhurried, intentional. Close enough that she caught the scent of winter air and dark amber. He didn't pause, didn't acknowledge her. Yet his silence wrapped around her like a cloak she hadn't asked to wear. It wasn't neglect. Neglect doesn't carry weight. His stillness was sharpened, precise. Control, not emptiness. She should have felt invisible. She felt observed. Not the way others looked, wrapped in pity or veiled mockery. His awareness didn't demand she shrink. It didn't extend rescue either. It simply registered her existence and chose inaction. That decision lingered longer than any spoken word could have. She didn't comprehend it fully, not then. But later, she would recall how power had moved past her and done nothing. Not from carelessness, from design. She couldn't determine if that made her protected or targeted, but she understood this much. Power that refuses to hurry is never coincidence. The lower quarters were colder, not just in temperature, but in texture, in tempo, in the way names were tossed out like discarded things. Sereth was no longer among the bound, not even the pitied. She was scenery now. Harmless, dismissed. Which meant no one guarded their words around her, so she absorbed everything. She didn't speak unless addressed, didn't argue, didn't resist. But her silence wasn't submission. It was observation, eyes attentive, hearing honed to precision. And gradually the architecture of power exposed itself. She witnessed how the lesser nobles wielded authority they hadn't earned, how influence flowed through intimidation, not integrity. She catalogued how want revealed itself in unguarded moments, stares held too long, touches disguised as accidents, voices that softened when they believed themselves unheard. She heard it all. She noted who commanded respect behind closed doors and who became targets of mockery the moment they left. She distinguished genuine alliances from theatrical ones. Reality, she discovered, rarely aligned with title. And Sereth began grasping something previously hidden from her. Survival here wasn't rooted in compliance. It lived in understanding, in recognizing when to voice truth and when silence carried more force, in perceiving beneath the masks people wore and into the reasons they wore them. They labeled her insignificant, behaved as though she carried no consequence, but in the shadows she was accumulating it. Strand by strand, every misstep, every inflated ego, every unearned certainty, they offered her fragments of themselves without awareness. And she collected everyone. Because perception she was discovering is where power begins. He cornered her near the archives, where the air hung thick with parchment dust and tarnish. A minor lord, recently promoted, still intoxicated by newfound status. His smile showed too many teeth, held no kindness, presumptuous, hungry. As if her quietness had ever signaled consent, he moved too close, his voice dropping like he believed proximity created intimacy. It didn't. Sereth didn't retreat. She didn't need to. She held her ground, locked eyes with him unflinching, and spoke one word. Crisp, cold, absolute. No. The atmosphere shifted, immediate and total, like a door slamming shut. He stilled. Confusion flickered across his face. The predatory expression wavered, uncertain whether he'd miscalculated or simply been read too accurately. He muttered something that resembled neither apology nor acknowledgement, then withdrew. She didn't watch him go. Cavor stood across the corridor, engaged with no one, observing everything. He didn't approach, didn't intervene. But his attention captured the exchange, captured her. And for one suspended breath, time contracted. Not because he endorsed her choice, not because he had defended her, but because he witnessed it, as though he'd been anticipating precisely this, how she would respond when tested. He gave no affirmation, no gesture, no expression, but something transformed. Others sensed it as well. The invisible boundary now established. A limit not merely physical but fundamental. She hadn't struggled, hadn't shouted. She had simply declined to be devoured. And now the message was clear. Want without regard? It reveals itself immediately and collapses even faster. The passageway was empty, carved from marble and midnight. Sereth moved through it alone, her steps barely audible against polished stone. The hour had grown late, too late for encounters. She sensed him before sound confirmed it. Cavor. His presence occupied space like fog, silent, pervasive. He didn't speak, didn't signal his arrival, simply halted behind her. Not near enough to make contact, but near enough to be undeniable. The kind of proximity that demanded nothing yet confessed everything. She didn't turn, didn't shift away. The air between them grew dense, charged, razor-sharp. Her heartbeat betrayed her, thrumming beneath her ribs. But she remained motionless, controlled. She didn't waver, but she registered the gravity of him, of what he could do, of what he deliberately wasn't doing. He didn't extend a hand, didn't close the distance, didn't attempt. He simply existed there, selecting separation while maintaining nearness. Not detached, not hesitant, just disciplined. That decision exerted more pressure than any touch could have. She offered no words. Neither did he. The silence wasn't vacant. It brimmed with what neither would name. It existed between them, unspoken and impossible to ignore. A question that made no demands. Her breathing faltered, irregular. His remained even. He could have seized the moment, could have exploited the stillness, could have claimed. He refused. And she comprehended then what most never would. Genuine power doesn't announce itself to be recognized. It waits, observes, maintains boundaries it could easily cross. His control wasn't absence, it was authority, concentrated. And she perceived it now with absolute clarity. True authority isn't measured by what you take. It's defined by what you choose not to. It happened without warning, too swift for preparation. The threat emerged from the eastern arcade. A rival half wild with ambition and wounded pride, violating custom, violating hierarchy. Expression feral, voice cutting through silence. Not theatre, genuine danger. Sereth didn't react, not from paralysis but assessment. She recognized it, the unhinged quality in his gaze, the way aggression radiated from him like fever. And she understood, this wasn't posturing. It was violence waiting to happen. Cavor materialized before anyone else processed the threat. He didn't call out, didn't reach for a blade. He simply moved, precise, soundless, absolute, and positioned himself between her and the advancing figure, not touching her, not even glancing her direction. His form became the barrier, his composure deadly in its calm. The challenger stopped, balance faltering on pure instinct. Fury dimmed. The atmosphere surrounding the sovereign communicated what language couldn't. You are welcome to attempt, but you will fail. The confrontation dissolved. The threat retreated, driven back not by violence, but by the withdrawal of tolerance. Cavor shifted aside, spoke nothing. His gaze never questioned her well-being, as though he already possessed certainty, as though he had intervened not because she required saving, but because the transgression violated something she had rightfully claimed. He didn't declare ownership of her. He had no need. And that, she recognized, was the most devastating truth of all. He hadn't defended her because she belonged to him. He had defended her because no one possessed the authority to breach that boundary, not without facing what followed. There was sanctuary in that, but no chains. And in a world where too many disguised dominance as devotion, she grasped the distinction. Protection given is not possession claimed. They didn't start treating her differently because of Cavor. They started because she stopped erasing herself. Sereth walked the same corridors, wore the same simple dress, occupied the same position. But something had transformed, not in how others perceived her, but in how she inhabited space. She no longer muted her footsteps or diluted her words. She didn't request permission. She decided. The burden of diminishing, of waiting to be validated by external judgment, had lifted from her frame, silent and complete. And once it vanished, everything else shifted. People registered the change, gradually at first. Fewer commands issued, more statements framed as inquiries. She wasn't granted additional authority. She simply ceased performing powerlessness. The lower ranks still designated her unbound. But the atmosphere around her grew taut with uncertainty, as though those who had previously ignored her now couldn't determine whether to fear her or acknowledge her. Perhaps both, Caivor observed, constantly observing, but the quality had altered. Not the way others watched, acquisitive, fascinated, poised to consume. His attention carried no expectation, just recognition, confirmation, as though witnessing something he'd anticipated, now manifested, not ownership, not satisfaction, something subtler, something reciprocal. She didn't address him, he didn't seek her out, but when their eyes connected across the plaza one dawn, something transferred between them, not ignition, but equilibrium. She had started reclaiming herself, and reality was recalibrating. Because transformation alters more than the transformed. It changes how power redistributes around them, how presence generates gravity, how sovereigns regard women who have stopped making themselves small. She never voiced it aloud, not in the solitude of her chamber, not whispered into empty hours, not even to the part of herself that still carried the mark of being overlooked, but the truth anchored in her chest like something forged and tested. She wanted him, not the throne, not the influence, not the collective gaze that tracked his every movement like magnetism. Him, Caivor Nytheris, who had never attempted to reshape her, who had never withdrawn when she established boundaries, who had never suggested she diminish so he could expand. But she wouldn't reach first, not impulsively, not desperately, not because the silence had grown suffocating or the tension unbearable. Desiring him didn't equal capitulation. It didn't mean abandoning who she'd reconstructed in his absence. So when he spoke her name, quiet, deliberate, directly behind her, she didn't turn. She inhaled, allowed the moment to lengthen, allowed the longing to exist alongside it. She registered the pull in her marrow, in her throat, in the stillness that gathered at the base of her spine, but she remained motionless, not refusing, recollecting. If she moved toward him now, it would be intentional, not reflexive, not compulsive, because what she desired most wasn't simply reciprocation. It was maintaining her wholeness even while being wanted. So she held her position, and he didn't press. And the space between them contained something fierce, something reverent, something incomplete. Being selected would hold significance, but only because she had selected herself first. He didn't arrive with guarantees, no proclamations, no conditions, just presence, unhurried and certain like a question that declined to be forced. Caivor stood before her, the authority of his position stripped from his tone. He presented a possibility, not idealized, not effortless, just tangible. A future with him, alongside him, not as property, as autonomous decision, and she felt reality contract to that instant, not because it was spectacular, but because it was truthful. Sereth didn't respond, not immediately. She studied him, observing how he didn't advance, didn't attempt persuasion, how his gaze created space rather than imposing expectation. It was the same discipline that had once seemed threatening. Now it registered as something transformed, regard intensified by want. "I need time," she said. He inclined his head once. Nothing more. No frustration, no withdrawal, just acceptance. They remained like that, proximate, but separate. The silence between them pulled taut, not hollow, but saturated. It contained every unexpressed thing, every exchanged glance, every near moment. He didn't occupy the void. He allowed it to persist, because he understood what she now did. The most potent desire isn't the kind that devours. It's the kind that waits, composed, assured, vibrating with potential. She didn't consent. She didn't refuse. She departed without turning away from him. And he permitted it. The distance between them didn't collapse. It electrified the atmosphere instead. Unfinished. Precarious. Saturated with the kind of promise that only time and deliberate choice can fulfill. If this story left you breathless, suspended in the tension, the discipline, the slow-burning authority, don't keep it to yourself. Like, comment, and subscribe for more stories where silence carries more weight than words, and desire doesn't demand, it waits. Your next favorite chapter is already unfolding.